It is a problem, but again, the West works very, very hard to discredit China because it is not a doormat for NATO and Western Empire. And
hello, everyone, and welcome into CrushTheStreet.com. I'm Kenneth Amaduri, and I brought on the line Jeff J. Brown. He's an economist. He's an author. He runs the website chinarising.puntopress.com, and if you want to visit him and visit his social media, radio, blogs, commentary, he's at ChinaRisingSinoland.com, and we'll have links to his information. He's an author of multiple books, and I want to focus on his latest book, which is China Rising. Interesting discussion here. Jeff, thanks for coming on the line with me today.
Happy to be here today, Kenneth. Thank you for having me on.
Well, China has overtaken the Eurozone as the world's biggest banking system and really has established themselves in the global financial world. The Bank of International Settlements has data that puts Chinese debt at 250% of GDP. Let's talk about China Rising. What do you attribute their success up until now to?
Kenneth, the greatest misunderstanding about China is that in 1980, when Deng Xiaoping came out with his reforms and opening up, everybody thought that, or everybody thinks that China became a libertarian capitalist country. And the subtitle of my book, China Rising, is Capitalist Roads to Socialist Destinations. And the reason is that only part of the economy was turned over to capitalist practices. The vast bulk of the Chinese economy is still very, very much communist. And let me explain why. First off, China has no private real estate. Every square inch, every square centimeter of this country is owned by the state and therefore by the people. And so when you read about the, quote, red hot, real estate market here in China, people are not buying dirt. They're not buying land. They're buying long-term leases up to 70 years. So this has a powerful impact on the on keeping people from amassing wealth, because owning real estate is one of the fastest ways to amass tremendous wealth, and you can't do that here because eventually your lease is going to run out and you have to renegotiate it and repurchase the lease. Secondly, the economy, the big national type sectors, everything from aviation to banking, you mentioned the banks, automobiles, mining, telecommunications, insurance, chemicals, it just goes on and on and on, steel, all the big heavyweight industries are all state-owned. When you hear about them, quote, privatizing, again, that's the West, projecting what it wants to see in China. They only allow 30%, maximum of 30% ownership by non-state owners. Most of those are Chinese citizens, and then they have very strict stock concentration laws that prevent anybody from amassing more than a tiny percentage. So that 30% is spread over a large number of people. And so they're never going to allow that to go over 30%. So, and in fact, it's interesting, the four largest banks in the world are Chinese, and so they are all government owned. They're all owned by the people. Chem China, one of the largest chemical companies in the world, is in the processes of purchasing the final throes of purchasing Syngenta, Monsanto's big competitor in Europe, which would make it one of the biggest agricultural behemoths in the world. Seven of the biggest 10 container ports in the world are in China, and they're all government owned. The airlines are owned by the government. The airports, the trains, the roads, everything, the maritime shipping, it's all government owned. And these are very profitable companies. The oil sector is government owned. 2 of the 5 biggest oil companies in the world are Chinese, and they're owned by the people. So this idea that government owned businesses are not successful is simply a denial by the West. And the top 10 state-owned companies in my book, I even have a graphic of it. They netted over $200 billion. I think it was in 2014. The latest information I had, I think it was they netted after taxes over $200 billion U.S. equivalent. So they're very successful, very well run. That's the bulk of the economy. The rest of it that everybody thinks these big companies are the same, but they're not. And that is the small business, the entrepreneurial sector. That is almost all privately owned. Mom and pop shops, small businesses. Medium-sized businesses, secondary and tertiary industries that serve all of those massive government-owned businesses, telephones. What the Chinese do is they turn these appliances, consumable goods, food, they turn all of these high-volume, low-margin industries over to the people and let them fight it out, helping keep prices down, helping keep inflation down. And so ZTE just came out with the latest 5G phone, the only 5G phone in the world that they released in Barcelona the week before last at the big mobile phone confab. So they have this very vibrant and cutthroat, competitive, high-volume, low-margin sector. So that's the difference. So with the government owning all the land, the government owning the huge industrial sectors, like the internet and things like that, it is still very, very communist. The other thing that makes it communist is they still have the 5-year plan, just like Lenin set out, in what was it, 1925. He came out with the 5-year plan. And they just had a big, huge meeting this week in Beijing, their big national People's Congress, and they really set out to set objectives, set numbers, set figures, set goals. How many kilometers of railroad are we going to build this year in the next 5 years? How many wind farms? How many solar panel farms are we going to build? Et cetera. And what makes this so beautiful and why China is kicking the butt off of Europe and the rest of and North America and Australia and New Zealand is ZTE can build that 5G phone before anybody else because the Chinese government has already planned in this next 5-year plan to have X number of 5G users. A courier company can plan because they know that there are going to be 50 airports built in the next 5 years. All this private sector, appliance makers can plan how many refrigerators we're going to sell, because they know that the Chinese government is going to build so many units of low-income housing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is why this model, this mixed model of predominantly government-owned economy mixed with a vibrant sort of under, lower economy, small business, medium business economy in the private hands is just working wonders. It's just amazing, Kenneth.
Jeff, it's interesting, the concept of government and their dynamic with business. I don't know, fundamentally, I don't like that. I think that when you have a situation where government, there's not a profit situation and someone at the top to really say, hey, this is not a good source or allocation of capital, you have a lot of inefficiencies in that. And we know that the debt has skyrocketed. I mean, I know it's like $8 trillion to like $26 trillion in a matter of a few years. And many would point to that as the growth point, the reason we've seen such massive growth in China. And you got to see that all these ghost cities. I mean, we have like some number of like how many ghost cities in China the size of New York City with bridges to nowhere. I mean, really, is that an efficient use of capital? And would a private investor have done that had it not been pushed by the Chinese government? And I guess that's what I'm wondering. Is it sustainable, all this that you're talking about? Any thoughts on this?
Very good. Two really good questions. First off, people, if you go to the Forbes Global 500, and you will see that China has now 30-something state-owned companies in the 100 biggest corporations in the world, and all of them are profitable. The difference is that in China, government-owned industries like this, their first criterion is that they must be good to their neighbors. In other words, which is what we would all like these days, American and European companies, is to care about their neighborhood, their country, and to try to do as little harm as possible. So the managers of Chinese corporations have to be really good, because not only do they have to worry about being good neighbors in their country, they also have to make a profit. And the fact that all of these CEOs and all the upper level management are fire-breathing members of the Communist Party of China. And so they're very, very patriotic, and they are really out to protect the interests of their country and their people, which is another reason why the Chinese are so darn prosperous, and why they have taken something like 700 million people out of poverty. They have the largest middle class in the world, now over 300 million people, growing by 10,000 people a day. This is all part of the reason. So they are profitable. They are not maybe quite as efficient as some of the more cutting edge corporations in the West, but they don't. You don't see millions of people being laid off arbitrarily here. You don't see the Chinese shutting down factories overnight and moving them to Mexico. They take care of their people.
Isn't there a fundamental issue, though, with the fact that the government is playing favorites with certain companies, with everyone paying taxes?
Absolutely. There have been some private airlines that have tried to go up against the big boys. What typically happens is they will try, and they will end up getting bought out by the government-owned airlines. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? It depends on your perspective. If you're a Chinese leader and you want to maintain stability, harmony, and you want to be able to plan 5 years in advance and plan airports and roads and subways and bus lines and electrical grids and energy, and provide low-cost transportation to the people, they may have a different perspective than a typical, quote capitalist in the West. There are private steel mills. There are private mines. There are private, but they are small. And they add to the total, but China has decided with its planned communist economy that they call these key sectors, and there's about 100 of them. And you can be, ideologically opposed to that, as most Westerners are. But the fact of the matter is, China has gone from 1949 to a exploited, colonized, poor country with an average lifespan of 35 years. By the time Mao left in 76, they were up to 60 years, and now they have a lifespan of an average of Eastern Europe. And they have the largest economy in the world in PPP standards, and many people are saying that even in exchange terms, it's underestimated and is probably the largest economy in the world. So what they're doing, it works.
Again, Jeff, I wanted to get you to comment on the fact that it took multiplying the debt by 5 times in a matter of very short time.
I'm happy to get to that.
Okay.
The debt in China is nothing compared to the debt of Japan. It's nothing compared to the debt of the United States. It's nothing compared to the debt of the United Kingdom. 250% of GDP is fairly modest compared to most Western countries. Japan and England are up around 500%. The United States is up around 350%. So why is it no problem for Obama and the Fed and apparently now Donald Trump to just keep printing tens of billions of dollars of euros and dollars to keep their economies afloat, whereas apparently the prism is different because China is different and is not basically a doormat of the West. That's the way I look at it. So their debt, and also the St. Louis Federal Reserve, Kenneth, came out with a study a couple of years ago and showed how, because of China's economic model, because of their state planning, because of their ability to manage the economy, their debt for every yuan or dollar that they generate in debt, they get up to $3 of economic activity out of that. And that was backed up by another extensive study done by a financial fund in Australia. I can't think of the name of it. I can send it to you later. And this was an economist, and he said the same thing. When China takes this debt and they're building high-speed trains, roads, electric power lines, dams, infrastructure. They're building networks, high fiber, fiber optics. And so they're putting all this money into connectivity, urbanization. China was 75 or 80% rural just 20 or 30 years ago, and it's now about 55% urban, and they're going to get it up to, and they have a goal. They're going to get it up to 70% by the year 2030. And so the debt here works. Also remember, the Chinese print their own money. They don't borrow money from the Rothschilds and the Stanleys and the Rockefellers. They print their own money, so they don't have to pay interest on the money they borrow.
That's an interesting point right there. Yeah. Jeff, one thing that you actually said, and I agree with, is that they're going into large amounts of debt, but they're actually putting it towards things that would be productive over time. You're building infrastructure, connectivity, and bridges, as opposed to maybe the U.S., which is spending on things that are maybe not productive. Trillions of dollars in the Middle East with really nothing to show for. And so the type of spending that the debt is on is arguably better spent in China than we're seeing here in the U.S. Although the official debt to GDP in the U.S. is 106 or so percent, right? 20 trillion divided by the GDP of 18 and change. What was the 300% you were referring to?
Well, that is the 250% that you're including. That includes private debt. That includes credit card debt. That includes student debt. That includes deferred debt, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when you add all that up in the United States, when you add student loans and credit cards and mortgages and private debt and everything else, it's well over it's 350 or 380%.
Got it. Yeah, just to clarify that. Yeah.
And let's talk about these ghost towns, Kenneth, because there are a few. There's a handful of turkeys out there. But when you really look at what they're doing, the Chinese have no other country has built more big cities in the last 50 years than China has. China has built over 100 cities, and I'm not talking about housing additions. I'm talking about towns and cities. They have built. Well, if you want to talk about cities over 100,000 or 200,000, they've built hundreds of them. If you want to talk about towns up to 50,000, they've built thousands of them. And so when you're building that kind of infrastructure for residential people, it's not going to be a bullseye every time. And so, and you know something, Kenneth, my wife and I and my daughter, until she went to college here, she's now studying at Beijing Normal University. But when the three of us were living in Beijing, we moved into a ghost town. We literally, Kenneth, I kid you not, we literally moved into a ghost town outside of Beijing. The roads were, the manholes were sticking up out of the road bed by, a half a foot, 15, 20 centimeters. Nothing was open. We were one of the very first people to move in. There were 2 or 3 restaurants, 1 bank, a couple of pharmacies, some hairdressers. Of course, these are all, other than the bank, they were all private owned. There was no stop signs. There were no trees on the sidewalk. I mean, it was literally a ghost town. And when we left 3.5 years later, that place was hopping. I mean, it had pizza parlor and hardware stores and more banks and that is what usually happens and this was a suburban community of 30,000 in Beijing. The Chinese have done extensive analyses of these cities. And they take a 20-year approach to these cities. They give these cities 20 years to develop. And the ones that you hear about, I can't remember the name, Odormas or whatever in Inner Mongolia. There's one outside of Shanghai. There's about 5 or 6 that the Western press just slobbers over and obsesses over. But they're not looking at the one where my wife and I, lived for 3.5 years. And as we were leaving, they were finally putting the finishing touches on a huge indoor shopping mall, which we were glad to not be there when they opened that thing. And that they take a 20-year view. The last I heard for that huge, it's big, that one in Inner Mongolia, I heard that with their government planning, with their ability to allocate resources, they're going to move. They're going to put new industry, high tech businesses in that area to support that ghost city in Inner Mongolia. Odormus, I think, is what it's called. And anyway, so yes, there are a few turkeys out there. Yeah, there are. But New York has thousands and thousands of people living or homeless on the streets, and has thousands and thousands of empty apartments that no one's living in. So it's not just a Chinese problem. It's a problem all over the world. And there's empty apartments in Paris. There's empty apartments in London. There's, hey man, Kenneth, I grew up in Oklahoma. There's ghost towns all over, There's abandoned towns all over the Great Plains and the Rust Belt. Literally towns that are boarded up and no longer exist. So
sure,
it happens in capitalist countries, and it happens in communist countries like China. But I would have to say that, and maybe Donald Trump will do something for the Rust Belt. Maybe he will help some of those towns open back up. I don't know. But with his attempt to try to re-energize industry and jobs in the United States, and that's where he got a lot of his votes, was from that dying Rust Belt and the Great Plains, with all those dead rural towns all over the place. So it is a problem. But again, the West works very, very hard to discredit China. Because it is not a doormat for NATO and Western Empire, and so they spend a lot of ink and a lot of megabytes, in the media, TV and radio, doing everything they can to portray the China as in a negative light, because because it does fight against Western Empire. And so I can say I lived in a ghost town, and I saw it actually blossom. And when we left, there were flower pots on the corners and tree-lined streets, and it was just unbelievable. My wife and I, we were up on the 10th floor, overlooking the shopping mall, unfortunately, but we also had a good view of the Central Plaza. And we just saw this town. It was like watching the birth of a society. And so that happens 97% of the time. The West concentrates on that, 5 or 3% that needs another 10 or 15 years for the Chinese to work things out, to get industry and people moved into those areas.
Sure. Yeah, I know, and I think that's the concern, is that for people, some of the research that I've looked at is that China has basically spent, has prepaid and built out their infrastructure for the next 100 years. So what's left for them to do other than to, I suppose, backfill all of the construction that they've done up until now? And I want to touch on something real quick. It's sort of a different topic. But going back to the U.S. and where China was, you mentioned China in 1949. The U.S. was top of the world, by far, economically.
Oh, yeah.
and jobs and the ability for purchasing power. And if you look at the trend, the standard of living here in the U.S. has drastically gone down. And I would argue that because of growth in other countries, that's taken away. That's competed with the U.S. purchasing power and the ability for American citizens to have as high of a standard of living as they once did as a whole. And I'm just curious, do you believe that overregulation and the cost of entitlements and taxation and lack of competitive environment has enabled countries like China to become more competitive and incentivized growth that may not have happened there if the U.S. would have stayed competitive?
Well, first off, China is actually starting 3 years ago, started rolling out a national health insurance, rolling out a national health insurance program. They adopted the Western, they adopted the, not the Western, they adopted the Western, the American medical system in the early 80s, just because they were trying to, reform and open up, and they realized that was not an efficient use of their economy. And so starting 3 years ago, they now have national health care, just like Europe. In spite of the everybody thinks that, this is just a freewheeling, capitalist jungle where there's no laws and rules and regulations. There is some truth to that in the 80s and the early 90s. We lived here from 1990 to 1997, and in my first book, 44 Days, Backpacking in China, I talk a lot about the 1990s as I reflect about our time here, and I did call it the wild East, Deng Xiaoping, Buckaroo days. It was a little out of control, but now, it's one of the most highly regulated industries, one of the most highly regulated economies in the world. I mean, the Chinese, change the reserve ratio on the banks, every 2 weeks. I mean, if the Chinese government, they're constantly, making sure that the private sector doesn't get out of hand like it did in the 80s and 90s, because it really was out of control. China has extremely high taxes. It's one of the highest taxed countries in the world. And everybody complains about it. But and foreign companies and Chinese companies, they have extremely high payroll taxes, about 50%. 40-something percent higher than France's. And we lived in France and actually owned a business in France for 5 years. So taxes are high here, but they're so well used. I mean, they plow it back. Infrastructure creates economy. Infrastructure creates GDP. And so nobody is complaining. Everybody loves the national health. They are also coming out with a Social Security, a retirement plan, which they haven't had in the past. So actually, China is moving towards a European model of socialism. Now, as far as the infrastructure, even though it sounds, pharaonic, like the Pharaoh building all this, they still have so much to do. I mean, Kenneth, this is 1.4 billion people, and they, it's as big as the surface area of Canada or the United States. It's huge, and unfortunately for them, 96% of the people live on 54% of the land. So they've got all these people out in Inner Mongolia and Xinjiang and Tibet and Qinghai out in the west, which I traveled there for my first book, 44 Days. I sometimes felt like I was the last man on earth. There's nobody out there, but they are spending billions of dollars, sending building high speed trains and electrical grids and solar farms and wind farms out there. And so the other thing is urbanization. They need the infrastructure for urban. So they haven't built out for 100 years. That's a bit of a misnomer. What they have done is they've taken the 10 largest cities, Beijing, Shanghai, Chongqing, Guangzhou, and some others, and they have created what they're going to call 10 super cities, mega cities. And so, for example, the city that we're living in now, Shenzhen, along the Hong Kong border, is going to be agglomerated by 2050 into a mega city of 160 million people. I mean, half the population of America. and that's just going to be one megacity. And so they have to tie sewage, buses, electricity, roads, subways, everything else, water, everything. They have to tie all that into these mega cities, and so that's going to keep them busy for a while. They also can build a lot more high speed trains. We're going to have a high speed train opening next year from Guangzhou down to Hong Kong, and from we can get from Shenzhen to Hong Kong in 30 minutes next year. So there's still a lot of infrastructure to build. I think they're building 50 airports in the next 5 years, in the current 5-year plan. So there's still, when you have almost 20% of the world's people, you've got to take. They want to move. They want to move around, and that's the biggest auto market in the world. It's all that 300 million middle class people. They all want a car.
Sure.
So they all want an apartment. And so there's still a massive amount. Low income housing. They're building millions of low income housing every year. And so there's still a lot to go when you've got that many people to take care of and serve.
Sure. Well, hey, Jeff, I appreciate really, this is a different perspective than we're usually used to having on Crush the Street. And, you bring up some interesting points. And again, productive spending. Even though I don't necessarily believe in big centralized powers being the most ideal way for anything to run, I definitely can see how China has made some strategic steps and getting itself to where it is today. And I would be careful, though, and caution China, not that anyone would listen to me, but to be too much like Europe and to be too much like these socialist countries, because we've seen what happens with these pension funds and medical systems and then these debt crises that's happening. I would say that China has gotten to where it is in many ways because of capitalism and free market principles in general. Even though it does have its communism sprinkled in there, like you said, I would say that that's not the model you want to go to. I mean, our social security system is on its way to implosion. We got a debt ceiling crisis that we're dealing with right now. There's a lot of things that, countries get confident when they become rich and they become successful, and then they lean over and start implementing so many socialist and entitlement programs and getting involved with wars all over the place, and that erodes the system that made him successful. So, Jeff, if people want to read your book, learn more about you, where would they go and what will they find?
Well, if I can send you my 2 books on China: 44 Days Backpacking in China, which is sort of a geopolitical travel log, the West versus China, when I traveled all through that deserted part of the poorest deserted part of China. That's available on Amazon. I also have a Ganshi, which is an independent distributor. I can send you that link if people don't want to deal with Jeff Bezos. And then my latest book, China Rising, Capitalist Road, Socialist Destinations, is also available on Amazon. Oh, actually, Kindle. It's not out in print yet. 44 Days is print and ebook. China Rising is supposed to come out by in print imminently. Amazon hasn't signed off on it yet, and it will also. It's available on Ganshi, and then hopefully in the next couple of months, I have another book coming out with another publisher called "China is Communist, Damn It." Dawn of the Red Dynasty, and I really go into. I focus less on the West, which China Rising covers. Really gets into the West versus East phenomenon, and but China is Communist, Damn It, which will come out in a couple of months is really gets into the details of how China works and why it's so successful. So they're all available or will be available for the last book on Amazon. And if you want to help out a small independent independent book dealer to do a little bit of competition with Jeff Bezos and Amazon, I can send you the links for those if you have room for them. If not, just go to Amazon.com and they're there. Jeff J. Brown and 44 Days and China Rising. You'll find both of them.
Jeff, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show with me today. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you for having me on, Kenneth. And anytime you want to continue the discussion, I'd love to chat with you. You've been a great host.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.